Custer's Last Stand. Have y'all ever heard of that? Well, it's another phrase that's just propaganda. Custer's Last Stand is in reference to the Battle of Little Bighorn. Let's talk about it. On April 29th, 1868, the Fort Laramie Treaty was signed. It guaranteed that the Black Hills would belong to the Native and Indigenous people, and it also promised that the U.S. would keep white settlers out of that region. Well, gold was found. Now that there was money to be made, the treaty became inconvenient, and the Native and Indigenous people were considered hostile. So the United States government told the Native and Indigenous people of the Black Hills, sell us your land or you will be starved. So the Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho tribes were like, nah, we're not gonna sell you guys our sacred land. So the United States sent in troops. So the Battle of Little Bighorn was on June 25th through the 26th, 1876, near the Little Bighorn River, present-day Montana. So the United States government sent Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer to go and solve the Native problem so that they can continue to get the gold. Custer was arrogant, reckless, and obsessed with glory. He couldn't wait to solve the Native problem. So the Native and Indigenous people created a coalition between the tribes. The tribes that were in this coalition was the Lakota Sioux, the Northern Cheyenne, and the Arapaho tribes. The key leaders of this coalition was Sitting Bull, who was a political and spiritual leader, and Crazy Horse, a tactical mastermind. Now, General Custer had about 600 soldiers, while the Native and Indigenous people had roughly between 1,500 to 2,500 warriors waiting on Custer. Now, Custer, who was so arrogant, ignored his scouts that told him that the Native and Indigenous forces were huge. He was like, I got that, we ain't worried about it. So he split his regiment into 3 smaller units, attacked without waiting for reinforcements, assuming that the Native and Indigenous people would flee. But they didn't. They fought back. So Custer and his raggedy troops attacked a large encampment along the Little Bighorn River. But Crazy Horse battle strategies were chef kiss. They did decoy maneuvers where warriors pretended to retreat to bait Custer's forces to move forward. Once Custer split his forces, the Native and Indigenous people surrounded them from all sides. Ravines, tall grass, river bends were all used strategically. And the Native forces, they were fast and they didn't need a central command. They knew exactly what they were doing without having someone telling them what to do. This was guerrilla warfare done expertly, something that the United States copied later without giving the Indigenous people credit for this brilliant strategy. And the Native and Indigenous people surrounded them and whooped their asses. I'm talking about plow, 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 plow. Custer and 260 other soldiers were unalived for trying to steal land so that they can get gold.
Bring me settlers!
No survivors from Custer's immediate command. See, Custer invaded treaty-protected land. The Native and Indigenous people were not playing. It was about survival. It was about protecting their land. And because of Custer's arrogance, he died, and so did 260 other soldiers. So Custer's last stand had nothing to do with freedom. It had everything to do with the United States government trying to steal gold from this land. The framing of Custer's last stand centers the colonizers, erases indigenous leadership, turns invasion into tragedy for the invaders, making them the victims when they're actually the aggressors. Language matters. Now, even though the natives won that battle, the United States flooded the region with troops. They destroyed the food supply. That's when they were unaliving all the buffaloes. That was intentional. They forced tribes into reservations and confiscated the Black Hills anyway. Later on, the Supreme Court ruled that the land was stolen and tried to give the tribes money. Their response was, we want our land back. We don't want a check. Give us our land. And to this day, they have never accepted the money. Little Bighorn is not ancient history, it's unfinished business. The modern land back movement argues that treaties are legally binding, that sacred lands were never legally ceded, and that sovereignty isn't symbolic, it's enforceable. So from the Black Hills to Standing Rock, the same pattern repeats. Indigenous resistance, government betrayal, corporate greed. Different century, same fight. Now, Custer's widow, Elizabeth Libby Custer, spent 5 decades trying to shape his legacy. But of course, what's done in the dark comes to the light, and Custer is shown to be a colonizer that was reckless and had way too much ego. See, the Battle of Little Bighorn terrified the United States government because it proved a few things. Colonized people are not powerless, empires can bleed, that this wasn't a last stand, it was a line drawn, and indigenous nations are still holding this line. So again, Custer's last stand was propaganda. It was to rewrite the narrative as Custer being the victim and doesn't showcase the bravery, the strategic brilliance of the Native and Indigenous people fighting to keep their land and to protect their families. Pretty cool, huh? The more you know. Remember, diversity, equal power. We can change the world when we work together and protect Black women. Until next time, I'm on a history kick. Let's go. Let's learn. I love learning and I love teaching. Let's go.